Robo-Show from our DC offices in our Sustainable Lending Department. So we're thrilled to be hosting you here today. I want to first of all, start thanking everybody who's here today. We have other people joining us. They're on the way upstairs, but we wanted to be respectful for people's time. And for everybody who's here online, we're thrilled that you have joining us. So I want to also thank, and they're not, some of them are in the room, the AV crew that we have here today. They're members of IATSE Local 11, as well as our catering staff, which is part of Unite Here, Local 26. We're a strong union bank. We were started by the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union back in 1923 as a union of immigrants. So unions, as we look at it, have been committed to paying fair wages throughout their history. And so we're thrilled to use union labor and to be a union bank. In fact, 40% of our workforce is actually part of our frontline workers are union members, which is unusual, certainly for a bank. The Living Wage organization, we're thrilled to be honoring or to be hosting them today. Their mission is to overcome the barriers and to create incentives to enable employers to pay living wages with the goal of providing a decent quality of life for working families. They envision a world where every family can enjoy a respectable standard of living and where every worker is fairly compensated without prejudice. Those are values and principles that Amalgamated Bank fully supports, both in words and in actions. Amalgamated has a long history of advocating for workers' rights, and we were the first bank to raise our minimum wage to $20 an hour back in 2019. At Amalgamated, paying fair wages is simply the right thing to do for our people. It's also critical to the success of our mission, helping us deliver better services to our customers and enabling us to have a positive impact on the communities we serve. I want to thank you for joining us again. And without further ado, I want to introduce Michelle Murray, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Living Wage for us. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you today. And for everyone online, we have over 100 attendees that are joining us virtually. So thanks again for being a part of this. I want to frame it to say this is Living Wage Week. Living Wage Week, not because I say it's Living Wage Week, but because the UK Living Wage Foundation made it so in the UK 10 years ago, and it has been expanding out globally for quite some time. So I just want to contextualize this within the larger movement. What we want to talk about today is about living wage as a movement and the really important roles that everyone plays and how impactful it can be overall to achieve a living wage across the country. So we've been launched for 1 year, right? We're early stage, right? In terms of thinking about this. We had a lot of support from Oxfam America and some of those that are sitting here in the room today when we were getting up and going. But we have had an enormous outsized impact, and it really shows big meat to the idea of how living wage can catch on across this country. We've already seen $100 million in increases in wages and benefits for workers in that short time. We see a lot more that are planned and coming down the pike this year, and we expect exponential growth of that going over time. So this is a concept that really works, and this is where we come at this, for workers, for employers, for communities, and really for all of us. And that's the idea that we want to bring today, is that everyone, hopefully, who's watching and everyone that's in this room will have not only a sense of how we can celebrate those that are working on this issue, but of what your role is to take this forward and be excited about being a part of that. So the first thing, just to get us started, is to say, let's contextualize what a living wage is. This definition is the one we adhere to. It is a global definition that was built by the Global Living Wage Coalition. And there's a few key points that I'll bring out that I want to share with each of you, which is it's a family concept. Often we've had people talking about a living wage as an individual living wage, covering individual cost of living. And yes, that is an important marker in understanding how to move wages in the right direction. But if you can't feed your kids, it's very difficult for us to say that that's a decent living and a living wage. But it's a basic concept too. We're not talking about everyone owning 2 cars and being able to pay for a college tuition with this. It's a floor, it's not a ceiling conceptually, and it's about basic decency from a human rights lens. And it may seem very aspirational when folks look at it. But we have employers here today that have been able to take that aspiration on, and luckily will be able to speak with us about that meaning as they go forward. In terms of our work as Living Wage for Us, we run a certification system as one tool. We run a lot more. You heard Mark earlier say that we want to remove the barriers and create the incentives to living wage payment, and that's a whole ecosystem and universe. Part of that is living wage research. So what you'll see is we have a map transparently available online. We do research in partnership with the Economic Policy Institute in order to come up with living wage rates county by county across the country. We group those by commuting zone, and you'll see a zoom in up there in Chicago and little groupings. And we talk about the lowest cost county in the commuting zone as the living wage in that area. So that's conservative. That's why we say we're a floor, not a ceiling. We're not saying that we're trying to make sure everyone can live in the most expensive neighborhood in the entire country. We're really talking about decency when we talk about living wages. One of the things I wanted to touch on real quick is everyone's thinking about inflation. It's a time of high inflation, right? Data is important in removing barriers. And one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure it's clear how costs of living are changing year over year in these inflation times, and it's not uniform across the country. You know, we have seen some locations where living wage rates didn't go up. We have seen other locations where they went up dramatically because costs really did increase. And some of the things that contribute to that movement is policy. So this overall movement, you know, if taxes dropped significantly in a state, that influences the amount that would qualify for a living wage that's necessary. If there's new rules on access to affordable health care, that influences the cost of living in a given area. So one of the things that we really want to be able to communicate is we are bringing to the table an opportunity for everyone here that's listening or that's in the room to at least do the first step of find out where your pay is against a living wage. Whether you get certified, whether you move, all of those things are next step down the road. First step, find out where you are, right? And the reason that there's more to that than just looking at this rate and saying, oh my goodness, I'm X dollars short of a living wage, is because we really want to look at total remuneration, right? So if we have healthcare costs in here, and let's say they're $1,000 a month, and you provide health insurance benefits and cover 100% of that for your workers, well, guess what? They won't have that cost of living for that $1,000 a month. That benefit counts. So we want to first make sure everyone can understand where does the pay for all of my workers actually compare to a living wage? And today we're going to tell a little bit of a story, and I'm just going to outline where we're going with the speakers that we have that are sharing today, and with some of the panelists that will be talking today. Think of this as following a story from the past to the present and where we're going from here on this entire movement. The trends of the past, and I'm sure many of you have seen this before, is that productivity started to disjoint from actual compensation quite some time ago. And you can see that in the chart on the slide. We want to think about, okay, there's space there. Workers have really been missing out on some of those wages, but it's not necessarily that profits haven't been there, or that work hasn't been getting done, or that money's not being made. It's a little bit about how it's being distributed, right? And so we want to think about that and think about how can we close that gap. And why do we think about that? Well, we heard a lot about the Great Resignation, or whatever you all would like to identify it as. And in that, we saw studies that showed 27% of the workers that were leaving their jobs were because they didn't have enough money to support a decent living. So let's think about that for a second when people are losing workers and having high turnover and not able to recruit. This concept is something that should work for employers. It should actually, at the end of the day, and if you think longer term, save you money, make you more profitable, make your company work better for everyone. Next thing I want to talk about is a problem that we have. in the US. And there's, you can take a look at the slide on a few different things that come into play, but I want to highlight one because I think it really matters. Because it's getting cold now in much of the country. Fuel's expensive now in much of the country. We all know that. There are choices, as studies were done, that as it gets colder and as the temperature goes down, people have lower caloric intakes and less nutritional food. So what we have across the country in a major way is that a lot of people are having to choose between heat and food. And that's a situation that you don't want your employees to be having to deal with, right? Not just from a moral argument, but there are health issues that go along with that. There are a lot of different challenges to getting to work, and that's why we have such a strong case. And I want to highlight for you what that means to workers, too. So this is a worker from one of our certified employers, Well-Paid Means. Nishad, he had moved here to take care of his aging parents and moved here from Bangladesh and said that he had to work 2 full-time jobs just to be able to pay the bills, which meant he left for work before his parents woke up, and he came home after they went to sleep. So there was no opportunity. And what that means is you don't have the help of family. So there's more people that are having to rely on other resources within a community to take care of those older folks within the community. For him, working with a living wage job means one job, right? One full-time job, which makes an enormous difference because that's enough. And so it's more than just making more to pay your bills. It's also finding more time to help your children with their homework at the end of the day, rather than having to go from one job to the next, right? It's having time to help the next generation and the generation before. I want to talk a little bit about the momentum in the US today. We have been speaking with for quite some time. They do a survey of Americans all across the country. And one thing just to highlight really quickly is living wage is the #1 issue for Americans across the country in terms of sustainability. So lots of employers, and hey, climate change, I'm not trying to take away from other issues, but lots of employers are investing heavily in one area. All I'm trying to put forward is this is an area that matters, right? It needs to have the kind of investment that those other areas are getting, because this is also important to consumers and to investors and to everyone. And we have momentum. So one of the things that I wanted to, and you'll see Olympia Coffee, which is one of our other certified employers, is here, that we do today to focus on how we can change this is pull industry together, right? Because everyone says, I need to be able to compete. And so what we've focused on and what we've targeted in our first year of operations was the specialty coffee industry, and said, let's see what happens if we get 20% of the industry paying a living wage. How much does that make it easier for those employers to be able to do that? Currently in our system, we're working with 20% of the industry. Not all of them are certified. That is a path. We try to help move employers along that path, but they're working towards that goal. And if we think about our ability, those people in the room and those people watching, to have outsized impact on how things move in our economy overall by thinking strategically about this and looking at this and talking to our colleagues, it creates tremendous momentum. And so leading from that momentum, I want to announce some of our certified employers that have just been certified with us that we haven't announced before today, and that we're excited to have some of them join us on a panel today. But Amalgamated Bank, Accenture, Biosystems Engineering, Forge, and Molly Moons are all brand new certifications that we're just announcing today, and Schroeder's. Sorry to have left that off. So we want to thank these, and this list is our other certified employers as well that have come on earlier, and we really want to highlight as well. And first say, let's celebrate those employers that are not only willing to move towards a living wage, but willing to get out publicly and have a third party transparency looking at how they're moving towards a living wage. And let's really get that support and that appreciation, because we need leadership to move this movement overall. And when I really say this movement overall, one of the things that I'm thinking about with that is how can we all have influence? Each individual employer can think about, let me get an analysis of how my total remuneration stacks up against a living wage. We're happy to help you with that. It's very simple. Let Biko, our Chief Program Officer, know. We'll get you set up on getting an analysis done. We've developed an online tool that does that for us. Shouldn't take too much of your time. Whether you think you're going to be a certified employer or not, right? Even if you say, oh, I don't know if we're ready to have a third party track us every year and make sure we're keeping up with our commitment, that doesn't mean you can't make change for your employees. And I want to be really clear in this, that we're encouraging every single employer, yes, to get certified so we can celebrate you with those that we have on this list. But also, even if you don't think that's a pathway, to find out where you are and work towards it. We have a number of affiliate members that we don't publicly put out because we're working with them in different ways, but very, very large companies representing millions of employees across the US that are working on this on a regular basis. It is an opportunity for any company, any employer to move in that direction. This is about bringing in all types of organizations and stakeholders that have a stake in making sure that workers can earn a living wage, and hearing about their role and seeing how we can build a system that supports all of that. And so who you're gonna hear from next is Joelle Gamble, who's the USDOL Chief Economist, and can give us a little bit of perspective from that policy angle and from the angle of the economics across the US. And then we're gonna bring a panel on of for-profit and nonprofit employers to talk about that employer perspective and how that stakeholder moves things forward. And then we're going to have Oxfam America speak, Irit from Oxfam America speak about civil society's larger role as these things push forward. This is not something for one organization to take forward. If so, it's a Band-Aid, right, on a big problem we have. This is a movement that everyone here has to work together to help build stronger, and has to say, what is my role in this? And how can I play a part in getting this done? So without further ado, having said all of that, I would like to introduce Joelle Gamble from USDOL, Chief Economist. And Joelle, can you come on up? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you all for having me here today. Can everyone hear me all right? Yes. It's always good to check. So I just wanted to say thank you to Michelle, to Living Wage for Us, Amalgamated Bank, who helped make this event possible, and just thanks on behalf of both myself and on Secretary Walsh and the DOL team for your work. It's very important work, especially in the time of rising costs for families, for working families. Oh, okay. This is the correct mic. There we go. Happy to start over, but I was essentially saying thank you. So, I wanted to just react to a few things that Michelle said, and then I'll go into more of what I prepared. But one, I wanted to just highlight the importance of the fact that this is a global movement, and I really appreciate you saying that, especially as, during the pandemic, the heightened risks of how globalized our economy have become really acute, and I think more well known. It's really, really important that we think about workers along those supply chains, both in other countries and here, in order to make sure that we're building a labor market in the US and around the globe that's actually fair for everyone. And so I thought that was just a really important point. The other thing I wanted to know is, one, I loved how colorful the index was, but also at the same time, I appreciate how you recognize that labor markets are fundamentally local, that you're looking at commuting zones, right? That you're recognizing that different people living in different parts of the country have different needs, and it seems like the data that you found in an era of rising inflation really reflects that. And so I think that that's also really, really important, I imagine, important for the employers you work with. And so as I give, some brief remarks before we bring up our panel, I wanted to touch on three things. First, just the top line economics of why a living wage is important. Two, why living wage matters for individual workers and families. And then finally, I'm a member of the Biden administration. Just talk a little bit about what it is that the administration is doing to help raise wages for workers and also to help lower costs. So I wanted to start with economics, in part because that's more of my bread and butter, but I think you covered it well, Michelle. There are a number of reasons why a living wage is so important. First of all, just a living wage represents a fairer share of the value that is created in businesses for workers. There's often bargaining over, the kind of value created by firms as a theoretical model and all of that. And workers can often lose out, and that's to the detriment of individual households, and frankly can help increase wage inequality. And so it's important on its surface to give people a fair share of what they are doing, what they are contributing to businesses. And this is important because workers contribute to overall output in the economy. They contribute to economic growth, and they should be paid that fair share. And I appreciate the emphasis that the living wage for us puts on paying productivity plus inflation, right? That's economically sound. That means at least 3% per year, right? And so that's the first thing off the bat. The second I would want to say is that raising wages can actually help increase worker productivity. And so you're incentivizing workers to be able to do more and also attracting more productive workers who bring their skills to the companies that are paying a living wage. And so you can pay workers for what they produce, but paying workers more actually helps them become more productive at work. And that's important for increasing output, yes. It's also important for reducing hiring and training costs by reducing turnover at individual businesses. So that actually can help save businesses money. They pay workers a living wage, helping to make them more productive. And then finally, offering a living wage can help companies compete for workers. We have experienced a really, really fast labor market recovery over the last several months. I'm sure you've seen a lot in the news about this kind of great resignation, about 11 million job openings and all of this employer demand for workers relative to the number of workers who are actively looking for work. What that means is, employers have to compete. Not only is there a relatively tight labor market right now, a lot of workers are rethinking, what they value in work, what they should be paid. A lot of in-person jobs are now riskier, especially if there's a risk of contracting COVID-19. There's now RSV. There are lots of kind of new ways in which workers are thinking about where they want to work, how much they should be paid, and so employers need to compete for the best workers. So that's a little bit of, I think the fundamental economic reasons to actually pay a living wage, but that's all kind of pie in the sky. What does this actually mean for people? And so people aren't necessarily solving the kind of mathematical trade-offs we often talk about in economics, but at the same time, they are trying to solve a complicated problem themselves, making ends meet, right? And that's not an easy thing to do. People are asking, can I afford this doctor? How will I get to work as cheaply as possible? Is rent going up again? Do I need to move? As Michelle mentioned, how do I pay for childcare? It's almost as expensive as my take-home pay often. And so, as we think about the fact that folks are facing higher costs, that means that the cost of actually working has gone up, and the risks of working have gone up. So during the pandemic, I mentioned childcare. It's expensive, but also it's been inconsistent for those who have it, especially as childcare employment remains well below its pre-pandemic level. That means when the price of gas goes up, the cost of going to work goes up, right? And so folks have to make trade-offs there. And frankly, as I mentioned before, the risk of contracting a deadly virus has made work financially costly and also costly to one's health. We're seeing that in the data with an elevated number of health-related absences from work. That is, as one recent paper actually recently noted, is leading to a smaller labor force. So our labor force is down 0.2 percentage points. That's 500,000 people because a lot of people have to take health absences from work. So there's a lot going on in the labor market. If we could pay people more, provide them with better benefits, that would actually go a long way. And I would also say a living wage is important because one job should be enough. Working extra hours, extra jobs consistently can be stressful. It can hurt an individual worker's ability to focus. It can keep workers away from their families, as Michelle mentioned. And we know that spending time with one's kids is actually just good for that child's development. There is economic research behind that too. And so for all of these reasons, it's important. I would be remiss to not talk about some of our labor secretary's time in Boston here. I'm in Boston because, this isn't just conjecture. While Secretary Walsh was mayor of Boston, he announced the findings of the Boston Public Health Commission's Health Impact Assessment of the Boston Living Wage Ordinance. And that found, it highlighted a number of opportunities to strengthen the Living Wage Ordinance by increasing wages and expanding the pool of workers who are protected by it. It also had an analysis that I think kind of underscores the points that we've been making. It found that, an increase in the living wage back then from $14 to $17 per hour created measurable health benefits among living wage workers, including a 60% drop in sadness, persistent sadness, a 30% drop in anxiety, and a 30% decrease in the number of residents who suffer from food insecurity, hunger, and an increase in the number of residents who could afford to eat healthier foods. So a living wage could improve your mental health outcomes and your physical health outcomes as well, which again, all also affect your performance in the workplace. And then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the Department of Labor and in the administration to also improve job quality, including wages for workers. Because as many of you probably heard President Biden say, we're really focused on lowering costs. Inflation Reduction Act will help lower healthcare costs for workers. It'll help in the medium to long run, lower the cost of energy, which is also, of course, very important, but we're also focused on the other side of the equation, which is raising wages, including making sure that the quality of jobs on the projects that public investment is going to create, including the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is about a year old, including the Inflation Reduction Act, are actually quality jobs that pay a living wage. And we've also been raising the wages for workers on federal contracts and eliminating functionally the tipped minimum wage for workers on federal contracts. And of course, improving access to critical services like childcare and elder care and other forms of care is still so important, and we're still fighting for that. And at the Department of Labor in particular, we're really focused on job quality for all the reasons I've also mentioned, and access to good paying jobs. We have a Good Jobs initiative where we work with employers to help them improve job quality, part of why I'm here today. And at the same time, we also recognize that the federal government has a lot of purchasing power, and we give out a lot of grants to companies, to nonprofits, and that those grants should also go towards creating quality jobs as well. We also, of course, do workforce development to help connect workers to better jobs through apprenticeships, pre-apprenticeship programs. And frankly, we do enforcement, frankly, for employers who aren't like the ones in this room, employers who aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's so important as well, because following the law means, and making sure that folks actually follow the law actually means putting more money back into workers' pockets. So all in all, I'm grateful to be here to talk about the important work that Living Wage for Us does, and just to mark the release of new data and the Living Wage for Us week. So I am also excited to speak with some leaders in this space. I think it's maybe time for the panel, because that's it for my remarks.
Thank you so much, Joelle. I really appreciate that. And we would like to go ahead and call our panel up. So that's going to bring Joelle Gamble, of course, is going to be our moderator. Appreciate that. We have Ty Graham. He's the Executive Vice President and Chief HR Officer of Amalgamated Bank. Megan Carlton, HR Managing Director at Accenture. And Minor Sinclair, Executive Director of the Center for Progressive Reform. And just to let you all know, on this, we have Amalgamated and Accenture just became two of our new certified employers, so we're excited about that. And Minor has been leading the way, and just as a quick shout out, honestly, when we were first in formation, before we got this launched, Minor was a driving force behind that when he was at Oxfam. So it's really an honor to have all of you all here, and I will leave that discussion to you, our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
I just wanted to start with, a big question. Of course, you can say any other opening remarks you have, but why did you decide to put a focus on a living wage now? I think I'll start with Minor.
Sure. So I'm with the Center for Progressive Reform, and we were the first nonprofit to be certified. So it's a great honor, and real proud of that for us. Our board had a commitment to living wage, and they felt like it was the right thing to do. We want to stand with our workers. We want to stand by our workers. We want to be decent. We want to be fair. And we didn't know what it meant. And to make that commitment that was vague and aspirational, but it almost raised more questions than it really addressed. is my salary enough? Do we get benefits? And so I was so happy that we could partner with the Living Wage for US movement to help us understand and help our staff understand what a living wage meant for them. Because it kind of cleared everything up. Two things were particularly significant. One is that we realized is that our salaries met the threshold, but our benefits didn't. And here we're entering the COVID era, and we did not have long-term disability. I don't know why we didn't have it, but there was no good reason. And so we took that on. And, fortunately, none of us had to call on disability, but we had that protection that we wouldn't have had it without that certification. And the second one is that each of our employees gets a notice from the Living Wage that shows out their benefits, their wages, and contrast that to the local living wage for the area. We have employees in 8 different states, so that'd be quite a task for anyone to do inside the organization. That's done, and it's done by a third-party certifier, which gives it a lot of credence. Yeah.
Megan.
Awesome. Yeah, so I work for Accenture, and for anyone that is not familiar with Accenture, Accenture is a global professional services company that specializes in information technology, in consulting, and in outsourcing. We have about 700,000, a little bit more than 700,000 people globally, across 120 different countries, and we have a strong and transparent commitment to a culture of equality at Accenture, and paying fair living wage is a critical part of how we achieve that equality. We have actually been paying a living wage, or aligning to the living wage, for about 4 years now. We have a very regular process that we run frequently through the year to be in a local context. So the map that we saw earlier really resonated with me. But in a local context, to make sure that 100% of our people are paid a living wage or more. In the United Kingdom, we have seen some successes and benefits from their work with the Living Wage Foundation. And recently, as Michelle was saying, we have become accredited at Tier 1. So we're really excited about that. But in terms of why now, we, in a post-pandemic environment, our employee needs are evolving. It's not just in terms of space and place, right? Like remote work, virtual work, in-person work at a client site or in an office. It's also about their needs from their employers, financial security, psychological safety, purposeful work. These are all things that our employees are talking about and need. And so from a client, if I think about it from a client perspective, more and more they are looking for holistic value, right? And that includes things like sustainability, where living wage is a concern and an objective.
Well, thank you. For Amalgamated, I would say that our story is really somewhat similar in that it really starts with the belief that everyone, particularly everyone who works for us, deserves a decent standard of living. And if you know anything about Amalgamated Bank, you probably walked past some of the signs downstairs that our brand is America's socially responsible bank. And looking at that, what we recognize is this, social responsibility really starts on the inside, as much as on the outside of the organization. It really starts at home with our employees. And we did take a number of steps that, as I've described, we believed was the right thing to do. And we've been taking these steps over the past few years. One thing that we did in 2019 was we recognized that we needed to adjust our internal minimum wage. And so we were the first U.S. bank to adjust our minimum wage to, I think, $20 an hour in 2019. And our lowest paid employee now is at about $21 an hour, just slightly more than $21 an hour. But we looked at these things on behalf of our employees, and we realized also that we needed to look at things that included our benefits as well. And there are a number of enhancements that we've really made to our benefits, including some things we do to really offset some cost for our employees, because we realize that with some of the benefits, particularly insurance, the rates continue to increase. And so there are things that we do to assist them there. And then looked at our full suite of benefits. But it really gets back to the fact that it's about our employees, and it's also at the heart of who Amalgamated is as an organization. So that's our motivation.
Thank you all for that. I really appreciate the comments that you had on how you were trying to do it, because it's aligned with your mission, right? Your values fundamentally of your organizations, but also the folks you employ.
Right.
And I'm sure that there are a lot of other employers who also feel this way, but might feel like getting to a living wage is hard to do. So my question, any of you can answer this, of course, is, what are some of the real or perceived barriers to, getting to a living wage, and how did you overcome that? And if time, how is inflation, or in a time of high inflation, affecting how you think about it? Anyone can
I'll go first. I'll go first. The real barriers or perceived barriers, correct?
Either.
So real and perceived is the expense associated with this. I think every organization really has to look at the increases that they can make in line with their own budget parameters. But for us, what we recognize is there was that expense to consider in increasing the minimum wage internally. And then once a group of employees receive an increase, it's not that you can check the box and say, good, all set, because now there are possible compression issues that are created when you move one group up. You've got to look at the next group of employees as well. So there may be additional increases that you're required to make there. But I do think that there are a number of organizations that realize that that's a potential barrier, and there are a number of creative ways to get beyond that, depending upon the organization. Some organizations, like Amalgamated, may be able to get there in one fell swoop, one change. Other organizations that may have certain restrictions on their budgets may be able to plan over time. I know that there are a number of organizations where they've aspired to get to a particular rate within the next few years, and each year those organizations make, I think, some movement towards that goal.
I think the time horizon piece is really important. You have a goal, you can get there, just might look differently depending on.
Depending upon your company, correct?
Any other folks want to weigh in?
Sure. I think that some of it is about a mindset around wages and compensation, and thinking about it less in terms of cost and more in terms of investment. It really becomes an investment as you think about how an employee's well-being can affect their productivity levels, which we talked about just a few minutes ago, but also innovation. Someone that is feeling financially secure in their work is also going to feel more engaged. They're going to be more likely to stay, which reduces hiring costs. So I guess I would say that shifting mindsets a bit to think more of in terms of investment and less in terms of cost will help others to align to that living wage goal.
If I could pick up on that mindset, and if you think, the nonprofit workers, that's a big part of this workforce. About 12 million workers work for nonprofit organizations, and that's about 10% of the whole workforce. So it's a big deal. And I think the mindset is that, well, they're working for a mission-driven organization, they can have a discount, and they call it the nonprofit discount. And so workers will often make $4 or $5 less than their counterparts in private industry, or at 70% compared to what their counterparts in the public sphere, in government, because they feel, well, they're there for the mission, and it has all the implications I think y'all have laid out. The problem too is that I think on the mindset, they said for every dollar you spend on an employee, it's a dollar away from your service. And even if that means your employees, you know, earning less than a living wage and maybe earning less than a poverty wage, and it's still sort of kind of like, oh, our mission is to help our clients instead of protecting sort of our workers. The other is that the folks that give nonprofits money, namely foundations, individuals, and the government, they don't want to pay a living wage. And so I was really pleased to hear what you said about the procurement and the funds that you give out in grants, because it's important. But we get sources from 10 different funders. Not one of them increased in our grant this year over the past 2 years, despite inflation at 7 or 8% every year. So, you know, you get squeezed, and you know, how do you cover that squeeze? So I'm thrilled to see the funders join this funders group to be able to recognize that problem.
I appreciate those comments, and you know, drawing on what you said, Megan, about the kind of investment return way to think about it. Right? You're investing in your workers. Your return is more innovation. Your return is higher retention rates. Your return is better service provision in many ways. And so it's not just about cost; it's also about benefits and a return on that investment that you're making in the workforce. I wanted to get to a more concrete question here related to the work that you all are doing and the certifications you've received. So why is it important, you know, for folks out there to have a third party work with you on your living wage commitment and certify your living wage payments for all of your workers? You know, that could feel daunting. And you know, what has the living wage analysis of total remuneration helped you understand about the labor risks and potential pain spots for your workers? It's kind of a bundle of questions, but it's about fundamentally the certification process, right, and the data, right, that's provided to help you with it.
Yeah. It's actually called stacking the question. That's what you did. Stack it. All right.
Well, I'm thinking very tough.
No. It's a good question, and I'll go. I think that what it's done for us is it's given us an objective lens on what we were doing internally. So, as I said, we adjusted to $20 an hour. It felt like the right thing to do based upon some data that we'd obtained. We looked at our benefits. It felt like the right thing to do, and so forth. But I think having a third party work with us really applies an objective lens to our own internal efforts. And I think for our employees, it really gives our employees some assurance that, you know, we do indeed have a commitment to ensuring that they have a decent, we all have a decent standard of living. And still, again, only talking about our efforts, when we look at people who do business with Amalgamated, it's not that we did this for those business purposes, but what we realize is that people do business with us because they align to our values. And so I think for our customers, it will be important that our customers see that we really practice a lot internally of what we are preaching as well. So I think there are just a number of benefits to this of really working with a third party. And I think the last one I'll just say is one of the things I realized in looking at some data is that it will be a moving target, and it's not the same for every market. And I think that was important for us as well to see that. Yeah.
You always want to weigh in?
Sure. As I think I mentioned at the beginning, that we Accenture has a presence in 120 different countries. Even just within the U.S., we have people all over in different cities. And so the framework that is, you know, provided in terms of both, you know, U.S. and global allows us a standard approach to this. And to being able to assess ourselves against the living wage, which is highly complex, but impartial and data-led, and just allows us that anchor point, and quite frankly, that additional accountability. You know, as I said, we were kind of all in over a few years, but this is really leveling up in terms of accountability and transparency, which is really important to us.
Yeah, just to add quickly, one of the, it took a little getting used to, but to have, another organization send our staff, what their wages and benefits, all that thing is. But as it realizes that, it creates the accountability you mentioned, Megan, and if they're not getting what they think they should be, according to, what the level is, a defined level, the defined standard, they can complain. And I didn't hear any complaints, so it must mean we're hitting our bar. And it gives me assurance there that I had to get a little used to at first.
And that's really important. Is it fair to say that something that I'm hearing, I think, is also that there's a sense of fairness to it? Because who's getting paid what at an organization can be a really sensitive thing. But you now have this other organization who's saying, this is what's fair, we've done the math. So as long as you know that you are getting paid that or more, you are actually getting a pretty fair deal.
Very well put.
That's really helpful. And then you all, are helping to write the checks, or you're writing the checks that are paying workers. But there are other folks in this space who could be helpful who are maybe not necessarily making payroll decisions. Policymakers, of course, funders. Just wanted to quickly follow up, and I think, Mina, you touched on this a little bit. What could policymakers and funders do to help employers pay a living wage?
Well, the funders, they can, if funders ask for budgets and they ask to see the cost of operations, and they know what the salary is, and they could say, hey, can you make sure your people get a living wage on this project? And if it costs a little bit more, I'll take it on. The stock market has done pretty well in the past 3 years. So the funders' portfolios and their endowments has grown, and it does seem as they could afford this.
That makes sense. Anything others want to add?
No, I think for me, because I'm in a different environment, we've talked about the fact that there are different audiences here. My efforts were more dependent on the things that we could do internally. So I don't think that there's anything I could look at from a policy-making perspective, but just really from my own internal perspective.
That makes sense. Let's dive into that more, actually. So I have specific questions for each of you because you are representing, right, different parts of this movement. So, Ty,
Okay.
Amalgamated Bank has always been strongly connected with the union movement. How do you see the work that you all are doing to ensure a living wage as furthering that ethos?
Yeah, now this aligns very nicely. If you, and this isn't a plug for Amalgamated, but if you take a look at our website, you recognize that there are a number of causes that Amalgamated advocates. One is workers' rights, and we do indeed, as Mark pointed out, recognize that our organization was started by the union in 1923. And so we have about a 100-year history right now of advocating for workers. I think that this aligns nicely with our union majority ownership, our union employee base, in that our union employees are guided, our practices with them are guided by a collective bargaining agreement that we have with the union. And we partner very closely with the union to ensure that we're paying our employees fair wages. And the decisions that we made previously were done in partnership with the union. And I think that this really gives us all some assurance that we've got a livable wage standard. So I just see this as really validation of a lot of what we've done. But the benefit comes in, as I said before, I realize this may be a moving target as things like inflation continue to impact us, but it also gives us, I think, some assurance that we'll have a lens into what changes we may need to make going forward. So I think it aligns nicely.
100 years also, congratulations.
Joelle, if I could add to that, Joelle, our credibility is probably the most important thing for our organization. And where we do research, we publish, we advocate. And so if people don't believe us, we're in trouble. And I don't think self-claims really carry much weight these days. I did this, I did this. People want to know, is someone else looking over your shoulder and verifying that what you're saying is truthful. And I think that's enormous helpful for our organization. Yeah, credibility is key.
So going back to kind of what we're saying about the third party and feeling like there's some accountability.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to turn to Megan. Accenture is a large employer across the United States. Do you see that making a public commitment on living wages that includes working to ensure subcontracted workers, such as janitorial staff, for example, are paid a living wage is an important element to ensuring Accenture is taking on responsible leadership stance in this space?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We are a socially responsible company, a truly human company, and as part of that, it is really important to us that we are paying everyone that works for us, whether that's a full-time employee, a temporary employee, a subcontractor, that they are able to cover their costs of living, and that it's a reasonable standard of living. We have we look each year, we look at our subcontractors and make sure that we are paying a living wage. There are some types of services that we contract where it's not a one, individual by individual contract arrangement. So, for example, the cleaning service as an example. And in those instances, we strongly advocate with the vendors that they are paying a living wage. It is written into our contractual agreements. It is part of our standard code of conduct for our suppliers, that they are paying a living wage for the services that we contract for with them. Extending the living wage into our subcontractors, our third-party vendors arrangements, that is very aligned with our core values, with our promise for ethical leadership, and it is part of how we are accelerating a culture of equality at Accenture.
And then my last individual question before we open up for Q&A is for Minor. So as a nonprofit organization, could you reflect on some of the unique challenges in that space that you think might be neglected even among nonprofits who are working in the anti-poverty space? I know you talked a little bit about that, but anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, here in Massachusetts, a lot of folks are on SNAP or food stamps, and about a quarter of those are full-time workers. So first of all, you have to understand, how can someone be working full-time and still on food stamps? And 10% of those folks are working for nonprofit companies, nonprofit organizations, ones with a mission of anti-poverty and to solve the world's problems and to, help people in the communities. And, they can't get it right internally. And I get it, you think about a homeless shelter and what is it? It's hopefully hiring people who are formerly homeless to work in the homeless shelter. But what does it mean is they're not paying a living wage to that individual. So it comes down to leadership, but it also comes down to the system in which those organizations live, and they'll need incentives to change to pay that living wage.
Breaking down barriers to paying a
Yeah.
living wage, but also incentives, which philanthropy plays
That's right.
a big role. So thank you all for your remarks. I wanted to open it up to see if folks here had any questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand. I will repeat it so that folks who are watching on the live stream can also hear it. Yes. So the question was for Megan, which was essentially about how do you manage to pay a living wage with so many workers in different parts of the U.S. We can talk about labor market being local, and then workers who move around.
Yeah. We use a lot of data also. I probably am not in a great place to answer that in a detailed way, but for sure we are super appreciative of our partnership with Living Wage for Us to help inform our commitment to paying a living wage.
Any other questions? Here in the front.
Yeah, this is really probably for Accenture and Amalgamated. I'm curious, Wall Street's reaction, if any, or, they've been on to this, and, we've seen companies, particularly in low-paying industries that are, historically low-paying, like retail and fast food, when they announce any kind of wage increase, the stock gets clobbered. So I'm just curious whether there's been Wall Street reaction at all.
Well, I don't talk about Wall Street, but what I will say is this: if you take a look at the decision that we made in 2019 to go to a minimum of 20, and where we are now with our lowest paid employee at $21 an hour, and the growth of the company stock, over the last year is about a 40% increase. And so I will not say how Wall Street has reacted, but I will say that when I look at the two side by side, I realize that the company has continued to experience significant growth in the value of our stock.
I mean, I'm in a similar place as Ty on the reaction of Wall Street, but Accenture has done some research. We talk about net better off, and what we mean by that is we ask ourselves, we ask other employees, other leaders, are employees net better off working for us? And that is really looking at human needs from a job and a payroll or a wage compensation perspective, but it goes beyond that into things like marketable skills and purposeful work, a sense of belonging, physical and emotional well-being and resilience. And what we have found in our research is that meeting that holistic set of needs, again, inclusive of financial security, it accounts for 2/3 of a person's potential at work. And that same research, what we were able to find is that 1 in 4 survey respondents don't believe that believe that their company cares for them. So there's a disconnect there that we're really focused on in how we address our people needs.
I think we see a question in the back, and then one over here.
Hi, sorry. Hi, I was wondering what indicator or index you use, especially internationally, to determine what the living wage is.
So, let me just make sure I heard the question. What index I use to determine the living wage? Is that what the question was?
I think the question is, yes, how are you what data are you using to
Okay, all right, no, good. Yeah, so what you heard me talk about was the past and the present, all right? So in the past, what we leveraged was just data that is like based on research that our HR compensation folks might do that allowed us to take a look at what we were looking at as the cost of living in a particular market. I'm not saying this is right, I'm saying this is what we did. And if I, for example, I have employees in San Francisco, DC, Boston, and New York, pick one, San Francisco, the data that I was looking at might have said that the cost of living in San Francisco, and I'm talking about the past, not the present process, but might have said San Francisco cost of living was $19 an hour. What I recognize is that I'm at $21 an hour, so I'm realizing that I'm above that. In New York, it may say $18, $19 an hour, but that's the data that I was using. The thing you heard me say earlier was what I'm happy about now is that I've got the partnership with Living Wage US, and I have the ability now to look at this objectively, but then also look at it more holistically as well than just looking at the cost of living number in, a particular market. And then it objectively allows me now to look at other factors, like I think some of what we looked at included that my employees, for example, get a certain number of paid days off, 11 sick days a year, and that they get minimum vacation time is 2 weeks. Things that gutturally felt like the right thing to do, I now understand objectively our gut was in the right direction, but it's just based upon data. And then some things that we're doing on our health insurance as well, and other factors that feed into it. So past answer was research. Current answer is we're going to leverage the heck out of our partnership, Living Wage US.
Thanks, and I'll way on over here. So I'll just add to that because I know you asked globally as well, just to give a sense on that. And for those of you all up here, our team, both a board member and our chief program officer and myself, we're all founders of the Global Living Wage Coalition before doing this work in the US. So we work with all of our employers as well to help them understand proper benchmarks in other countries and to work in that direction. We just really wanted to focus on this issue in the US. So there's always, if you do have questions about those data, let us know. We'll tell you where to go globally.
Thank you all for your work. As we're experiencing this care crisis, and unfortunately, it seems to be an issue that at least the federal government and many state governments aren't taking action on. How are you all able to help with, kind of the squeezed employees that are, both experiencing the inability to find, care, and then hopefully even lifting up. If there are ways for us to lift up caregivers that are paying, a fair and living wage.
Fortunately, I do say unfortunately, I don't have, if what you're referring to is care with regards to childcare, and I don't have a program specific to that. And what I do have, and this may not be the solution that you're looking for, but in those instances where our employees may have a particular need that they're not able to personally address, then there's the option of having a discussion with me or one of my HR business partners if they're going through a struggle. And we can look to see if there's some bank assistance that we can offer to the particular employee. But as for a structured program around care, I don't have that. But it would be based on the individual bringing forth a need and the bank doing what the bank can do.
What we did this past year was, and Ty, I think you did it too, which is to do, we had a contingency fund for one-time allocations to help mitigate the cost of inflation. And so that I think helped, hopefully for care, but across the board, and without sort of kind of systematically raising the salaries in a way that we didn't feel was sustainable. One of the ideas I heard today, which I really liked, I want to think more about, was a contribution to the health savings account. I don't know who said that, but I thought that was a health savings and a flexible savings account. I thought that was a really good idea.
I think it was something that I was talking about us doing, and maybe I didn't connect it to your question, but in looking to offset a number of the costs that our employees have, we realized that the healthcare costs have gone up. And previously, the organization contributed $1,000 for the healthcare savings accounts for our employees, for their individuals, those who were insured as individuals, and then $1,500 for family. We recently increased that to $1,500 for individual and $2,000 for family, but realizing that that would aid the employee with, was about I think a 10% or so increase in health insurance costs. But you're absolutely right, which is the other thing is in addition to that, then there are things that we can perhaps do on inflation-adjusted merit pools as possible, which is something that we did last year. But although I'm not with my employees now, I have to say this as a disclaimer, which is an inflation-adjusted merit pool doesn't mean that everybody gets the same amount. It means that it's based on performance. And so there are going to be individuals who get 6%, there are going to be individuals who get a lesser percent, but all based on performance. But looking at an inflation-adjusted pool was something else that helped us. But again, it's not directed at care, but just to alleviate some of the pain that employees do feel. So thank you for pulling that up.
One, I'm not sure that this is exactly where you were going, but one of the offerings that we have, acknowledging that it can be extraordinarily stressful when care doesn't work out. We have emergency childcare, emergency family care, I would call it, options. So if, for example, something happens and employee's family can't be cared for a day or a week, we have an offering where they have a number that they can call and get some help to identify an alternative that is cost reasonable, if you will, which is it can go a long way to addressing stress and challenges as they're trying to navigate their family and their work commitments.
The other thing we did, our healthcare costs went up 24% year on year, which is a bite. And so we, had to pay that for our contribution. And then we also paid that incremental increase for the employees' contribution. And the reason that we did that is that, we wanted to kind of like stand by employees, but also we wanted them to stay with us. And our healthcare percentage was probably not the highest. And so if they could get better healthcare deal elsewhere, maybe we'd lose them. So at least we picked up both sides of that 24% increase.
We have a question from one of the online viewers, which is, once you instituted a living wage in your organizations, what impact did it have on your workforce?
Yeah, what I can say is I measure turnover, and I've been with Amalgamated for the past year, but in looking at the 3-year trend in turnover, what I do recognize is that at the point where the rate changed, my turnover has consistently been, my target is below 15%, but it's been consistently around 10, 11, 12%. And that's my voluntary, regrettable turnover, people who leave who I don't want to leave. But I do think that there is a correlation to turnover, but I do realize that people don't only stay with an employer, as we'll all say, because of money. But I do think that there is a correlation to that, but we've got to work on satisfaction and all the other levers that we play as well. Hopefully that.
The other place is recruitment. It comes more from people who are interested in joining our organization and say, hey, that's cool. That's the kind of place I want to work. And because they don't know a lot about your organization yet. And to be able to see that, I think, is a signifier.
Just for context, how many employees are in each of your organizations?
I have 400.
We have about 80,000 in North America, just north of 700,000 globally.
We have less.
That's impressive. That's impressive.
I should have gone last.
I think that's it for Q&A. I just wanted to say, thank you to our panelists for your time, your
leadership and for sharing your insights with us today. So
Thank
give it a
you.
round of applause.
Thank you. There's the Bible.
Thank you as well. I want to thank Joelle as well. So thank you as well, Joelle, and for everyone for joining that panel. It's super helpful, and we're really excited to hear from those people that are actually practicing this. And I want to take us in our next piece in our journey to talk about another company's journey and someone who knows a lot about it. Rick Wartzman recently wrote, and I will bring up that presentation, a book called Still Broke. And it's going to talk a little bit about that. It is actually released, I think today. So this is an exciting moment for us and for Rick. And I did want to say beforehand that if you aren't here in person and after you hear Rick talk about what's in this book and what it's sort of taking us through and how it's also calling for a living wage, we will have a flyer to share for discounts for anyone who'd like to follow up and get that. We have them in person, but if you're online, we will definitely make sure we get that out to all of you as well. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Rick Wartzman to come up.
Great, thank you so much. Can you all hear me okay? Great. And as Michelle said, this book was officially released just yesterday. So this is kind of the launch, and I really can't think of a better place to be than right here with all of you and with Living Wage for Us, and you'll kind of get a sense why that is. Don't let the title Still Broke fool you. This is not a screed against Walmart. Rather, the book is, as the subtitle suggests, an examination of the company's remarkable transformation, as it has gone from being the most vilified employer in America to one that has raised its workers' wages, improved benefits, boosted skills training, and shored up scheduling for those on the front lines. But the book also pulls no punches, as it examines how Walmart, the biggest employer in America with more than 1.5 million US workers, came to make these investments and what its actions say in the end about corporate America's willingness to provide a true living wage for all. My own relationship with Walmart goes back nearly 2 decades. In 2003, I was the business editor of the Los Angeles Times and had a major hand in shaping a 3-part series called The Walmart Effect. The first story in that series, headlined "An Empire Built on Bargains Remakes the Working World," you can see here, included this passage high up in the piece. The company has prospered by elevating one goal above all others: cutting prices relentlessly. US economists say its tight-fistedness has not only boosted its own bottom line, but also helped hold down the inflation rate for the entire country. Consumers reap the benefits every time they push a cart through Walmart's checkout lines. Yet Walmart's astonishing success exacts a heavy price. By squeezing suppliers to cut wholesale costs, the company has hastened the flight of US manufacturing jobs overseas. By scouring the globe for the cheapest goods, it has driven factory jobs from one poor nation to another. Walmart's penny pinching extends to its own then 1.2 million US employees, none of them unionized. By the company's own admission, a full-time worker might not be able to support a family on a Walmart paycheck. My team would go on to win the 2004 Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting for our work. That's me, second from the right, accepting the award. And look at all that hair I had back then. Pretty amazing, right? I continued to follow Walmart closely over the years. And in my last book, The End of Loyalty, The Rise and Fall of Good Jobs in America, I used the company, kind of held it up as a paradigm of 21st century capitalism, one that elevated the interests of shareholders over employees, really profits over people. Many of Walmart's workers, I wrote, had been placed on a path to impoverishment. But then in 2017, my connection to the company took something of a twist. As part of my day job at the Drucker Institute, a social enterprise based at Claremont Graduate University just outside Los Angeles, I'd begun to develop a lifelong learning system that could help people discover and access the skills they needed to advance in their careers and also thrive outside of work. This would eventually turn into a digital learning platform called Bendable. But back then, this was just a germ of an idea, the need for which I highlighted in broad terms as I was giving speeches about the end of loyalty and decrying how the unraveling of the social contract between employer and employee in America over the past 50 years has meant not just shakier job security, stagnant pay, and eroding healthcare and retirement benefits, but also less company-provided skills training of the kind you see depicted here. As it turned out, there were some Walmart executives in the audience at a couple of these talks. As you can see, I had hair back then too. And they began to engage with me about the need for innovation around workforce development, an area of common interest. Long story short, Walmart's corporate foundation, walmart.org, became, along with Google, a major funder of this initiative at the Drucker Institute. Eventually, the company would provide more than $2 million in philanthropy for the project. Now, when the Walmart funding first materialized, I couldn't quite get over it. The company obviously knew that I had been among its harshest detractors. Perhaps I thought they were just trying to buy me off. But in the end, it didn't really matter. By having a different kind of relationship with Walmart, I was able to learn more about the company than I ever had before. I had a window inside. As I got to know people at Walmart, I was surprised. Many were much more liberal in their politics than I'd anticipated. Some identified as progressive. A good half dozen people told me that they had thought of Walmart as the evil empire before they got there. But a recruiter had persuaded them to come and listen, and once they set foot in headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, it didn't take long to be swayed that Walmart was sincere about reforming many of its past practices, especially those pertaining to its frontline workers. This was an amazing chance, more than one told me, to change the world from the inside. As these conversations continued, the more intrigued I became and the more convinced that something meaningful was transpiring at Walmart. And so I pitched the company. I wanted to tell the story of how it was transforming its relationship with its hourly workforce. And I was just the right person to do so. After all, who could be more credible than someone who had decried Walmart's conduct for so long? All the while, I stressed that none of this would be possible unless I could pursue things on my own terms. For starters, I'd need complete and open access, something the company had never really given a journalist before. And as much as I wanted to peek into Walmart's inner workings and have them cooperate, I took pains to be straight up. While I genuinely thought the company's ever-improving treatment of its hourly employees hadn't gotten the attention it deserved, and this book was a way to rectify that, I wasn't going to sugarcoat any shortcomings that I found. I told the company that I'd be reaching out to its staunchest antagonists, including the labor advocacy group United for Respect, the United Food and Commercial Workers, and Senator Bernie Sanders, who introduced a bill that would prevent large companies from buying back their own stock, often to bid up the price, unless they paid all of their workers at least $15 an hour. The name of that legislation was the Stop Walmart Act. Right? This would be no corporate hagiography. 3 years later, the result is still broke. The heart of the book is a narrative that spans 10 years, from 2005 to 2015, when Walmart raised its starting wage across the company for the very first time since its founding in 1962. Pictured here, of course, is founder Sam Walton, Mr. Sam, as he was affectionately known. And if you can't make out the button on his jacket, it says, "Our people make the difference." The Walton would acknowledge that when it came to his hourly workers' paychecks, he could be, in his own words, chintzy. It was over the course of this 10-year period that Walmart in many ways remade itself. I detail how, after the company had used its expertise in logistics and vast distribution network to deliver water and food and medicine to communities that had been ravaged by Hurricane Katrina, it pledged to do more as a socially responsible company. When Katrina hit, Walmart's then CEO, Lee Scott, said, "The world saw pictures of great suffering and misery, but I saw something else. I saw a company utilize its people, resources, and scale to make a big and positive difference in people's lives." During this time, we were asked by governments, relief agencies, and communities to help, and look what happened, he said. We were showered with gratitude, kindness, and acknowledgments. This was Walmart at its best. Katrina asked this critical question, and I want to ask of you, what would it take for Walmart to be that company at our best all the time? What if we used our size and resources to make this country and this earth an even better place for all of us, customers, associates, our children, and generations unborn? What would that mean? Could we do it? Is this consistent with our business model? What if the very things that many people criticize us for, our size and reach, became a trusted friend and ally to all, just as it did in Katrina? I show how Walmart became a greener company, so much so that it is now widely regarded as a corporate environmental and sustainability leader. How it has donated billions of pounds of food to America's food banks. How it became one of, how it cut the price of prescription drugs so significantly, it increased the utilization of antihypertensive medication and decreased the probability of an avoidable hospitalization among Americans. How it became one of the few large companies, and certainly the most prominent, to call for universal health coverage and back the Obama administration's employer mandate. The president would later even visit a Walmart to talk about renewable energy. How it started to carry foods with less salt and sugar, earning the praise of First Lady Michelle Obama. And yet the one place that Walmart wouldn't budge was on worker wages. 6 months before he gave his big speech following Hurricane Katrina, Lee Scott, seen here, had given a sense of why. Some well-meaning critics contend that Walmart should be setting the pace for wages and benefits for the entire economy, just as a unionized General Motors was said to have done in the post-war period, helping usher in the great American middle class that this country is so proud of, the CEO said. The facts are that retailing doesn't perform that same function in the economy as GM does or did. Retailing has never occupied the top tier of wages in this country or in any country. Walmart could never seem to get beyond this view until it was absolutely forced to. Walmart had always faced fierce criticism for the low pay it provided, first from the unions and then from our Walmart, now United for Respect, from the interfaith community, from politicians. None of this, though, was enough to persuade Walmart to move on wages. What finally did the trick was a business imperative. By 2013, Walmart had held down labor costs to such an extent, its retention of frontline employees was abysmal. Its stores were untidy, its shelves were often bare. Sales were suffering. I went into a store in North Carolina and their turnover was 400%, Judith McKenna, a Walmart executive, told me. I can remember talking to the store manager and I was like, your entire team turns over 4 times a year. How do you run the store? He's like, I just do my best. Sometimes the little things said a lot. When McKenna stepped into a store in New Mexico, she found herself staring at the floor. When did we start using brown tiles? She asked one of her colleagues. That's dirt, he said, not floor tile. As she continued to tour stores, McKenna realized this level of apathy wasn't an aberration. Everywhere, she said, the associates were just like, nobody cares. By early 2015, Walmart's new CEO, Doug McMillon, pictured here, knew he had to do something. And so Walmart began to invest in its workforce as it never had before. At the time, Walmart's average starting wage was $7.65 an hour, just above the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Still $7.25 an hour. Walmart would raise that over 2 years to $10 an hour, and it has continued to lift wages since then, so that the minimum wage is now $12 an hour. Certain roles start much higher. The company's average wage is up over $17 an hour. It has started to use more full-time labor and fewer part-timers in an effort to help bolster people's incomes and give them more stability. It has extended its health coverage, and it has invested in training and education and created new career pathways. Yet, after all that has been said and done, here's the upshot. The average Walmart worker still makes less than $29,000 a year. All too many of its workers are on food stamps and Medicaid. For those with the temerity to question why Walmart doesn't pay more, the answer you get is always the same. Some version of, our wages reflect the local market average for this type of job. Missing from this is any recognition that the market average has been weak for decades, and that Walmart, as the largest employer in the country, has helped to set the standard. As Allison Omens, the chief strategy officer of Just Capital, we heard about before, said to me, it becomes a circular argument that Walmart is at the average. Functionally, they are the market. So where does this leave us? In the eyes of many, Walmart has turned a corner, plain and simple. A decade ago, the notion that Walmart could help corporate America find its soul would have been laughable. Boston Globe columnist Shirley Leung has written, today, Walmart and Macmillan are no joke when it comes to showing how companies can do well and do good. Walmart has gone from being seen as a problem to becoming a significant part of the solution, said John Struer, the chief executive of Calvert Research and Investment, which specializes in socially responsible investing. In 2016, as Walmart raised its starting wage to $10 an hour, Fortune named the company to its annual Change the World list. And indeed, it is tempting to cling to the belief that companies like Walmart can change the world, especially at a time when government is so polarized and in so many ways dysfunctional. When the government is absent, the PR firm Edelman has said, people clearly expect business to step in and fill the void. And the high expectations of business to address and solve today's challenges has never been more apparent. Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce, titled a section of his book Trailblazer to position the private sector as our savior. Business is the greatest platform for change, he wrote. Now, I've always been a both-and guy, someone who has thought that both government and business have a vital role to play in making sure that America's workers can earn a decent living. But my last book, The End of Loyalty, was more in Benioff's camp, premised on the idea that government was mainly there to set the guardrails and provide a safety net when someone really needed help. It was up to business to carve up the pie broadly and fairly, more as it had after World War II. Washington's prod alone can't turn things around, I wrote. Corporate executives must step up. It is their companies that must reinstitute a sturdier social contract with their workers. My 2-year dive into Walmart has caused me to reconsider. Yes, business can and should do more, much more. In fact, as you can see here in this polling from Just Capital, the American public fully expects companies to pay a living wage. And this is true for significant majorities of Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike. Yet what I've come to believe is that unless there's a government mandate, Walmart and most every other company in America will never move far enough or fast enough to provide people with a genuine living wage. Sure, there are exceptions, including those companies that have signed on to the Living Wage for Us program, right? And you all really should be applauded. Everything you do can help hundreds or maybe fewer or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of workers. That is really meaningful. It is really important work. But for most of corporate America, I'm afraid that Washington's prod is the only way to get there. There's no mystery as to the policies we need to help workers regain their rightful share of the nation's prosperity. I'd start with these: rewriting labor law to expand collective bargaining, as well as to foster new avenues for employees' voices to be heard, including sectoral bargaining and seats on corporate boards. Making full employment the point at which most everyone who wants a job can find one and a catalyst for rising wages, a primary goal of government. Restoring overtime pay so that the majority of salary workers qualified as they did in the 1970s, not just the 15% who do now. Buttressing worker protections so that it's harder to pilfer people's wages or misclassify employees as contractors. And devising a health system that gives every American affordable access to good medical care, untethered to the workplace. More than anything, though, we should require that companies pay their workers enough to live on. What this looks like is also not a mystery. In Still Broke, I call for a federally mandated living wage of no less than $20 an hour. Why? Well, because according to calculations from Living Wage for Us, 80% of Americans reside in a county where to support the typical working family, they need to earn at least $20 an hour. And Michelle, these are numbers from last year's data, but she assures me nothing has really changed in that calculation. Look, I am not naive. Many are sure to dismiss $20 an hour as radical. But I would suggest that what is truly radical is this. In the richest country on earth, 1 in 6 working people can't come up with the money for their prescription drugs. That even before COVID-19, about 30% of families with 2 working adults experienced material hardship, such as falling behind on the mortgage or the rent or the medical bills. That 1/3 of those going to food banks are from a household with at least one member who has been working. That nearly half of Americans have only the slimmest of financial cushions and wouldn't be able to cover their expenses for more than 2 months if they lost their job. That homelessness is not just a manifestation of mental health issues and addiction, but also of work that doesn't pay sufficiently, with more than half of those in shelters and more than 40% of those on the streets having had some formal employment in the year they were living under these conditions. When it comes to poverty, Princeton sociologist Matthew Desmond has explained, a willingness to work is not the problem, and work itself is no longer the solution. America is suffering from a wage crisis, and it's not just at Walmart. Pearson, the education publishing company, posted an ad last year for a part-time online writing tutor. The ideal applicant, it said, would have completed graduate level coursework or have a degree in rhetoric, composition, literature, or English education, specialty coursework, a degree or teaching experience in English as a second language, or teaching experience in developmental and first-year English courses. The anticipated starting wage between $10.35 and $12 an hour. A 2017 survey of thousands of frontline workers at Disneyland, which of course calls itself the happiest place on earth, found that more than 10% of them had been homeless sometime in the preceding 2 years. 2/3 couldn't afford to eat 3 meals a day. And if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend Abby Disney's new documentary on just this issue called The American Dream and Other Fairy Tales. It's really terrific. In 2020, employees at Blizzard Entertainment, the maker of World of Warcraft and other top-selling games, made it known that some testers and customer service representatives were being paid minimum wage. One Blizzard worker talked about skipping meals to make rent and using the company's free coffee to dampen his appetite. 2/3 of some 10,000 Kroger supermarket workers surveyed in 2021 said they weren't earning enough to cover their basic expenses each month, with 44% reporting that they couldn't pay their rent and 39% unable to afford groceries. And on it goes, so that depending on how exactly you measure it, some 25% to 40% of the US labor force, that's 40 million to 65 million working people, have trouble making ends meet. None of this is to make light of the steps that Walmart itself has taken. In the context of its own history, the company has evolved far more than many others. As I've said, as my book illustrates, its transformation has been real. But this is also real. If you work at Walmart, even after everything it has done to improve your job, there's more than a fair chance that you'll still be poor. The problem in the end isn't that Walmart is evil. The problem is that this is what good in America, or at least good enough, has come to look like. So I'm going to leave it there, and happy to chat with y'all afterwards. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Rick. We really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to reading the entirety of this book. I put mine in pre-order quite some time ago, so I'm waiting for it to arrive at my house. Um, but I think it's really important, right, for us to think about where we have to go, and that's why we're talking about the way forward in this next section, and that it's not just living wage for us. We're here with one tool, and we are making sure that data is available, that information is available. We're trying to remove any of the reasons why you wouldn't do something about a living wage. But policy matters and other places matter, and that's not our sort of direction forward. So what I'd like to do is have a few folks come up and talk, and start with about those other ways forward, and starting with Irit Tamir, who is at Oxfam America and is the director of private sector department there. Thanks, Irit.
So thank you so much for having me here. Is this working? Yes.
For you to change it too.
Great, thank you. So Oxfam America has had a very long history of standing with workers and their families and against inequality, working poverty, and unfair labor practices. We believe living wages are a human right and a business imperative, and a vital force for building a more just and sustainable world. We were really honored to play a role in coordinating the space for the Living Wage for Us standard to come together and provide the resources the organization needed to develop the wage benchmarks and launch a year ago. It's so exciting to see how far the organization has come, and we know it is just the beginning. I particularly want to note the deep engagement that these leading employers, including Amalgamated Bank, invested in the standard setting process, and also the effort and vision contributed by allied organizations from worker to gender justice fields. That kind of collaboration, creative thinking, and building of common ground is a crucial component of Oxfam's work and the future of the living wage movement. We see tremendous momentum and power behind the idea of living wages. Truly, this is a concept whose time has come. The call for living wages is increasingly one that companies just can no longer deny. Paying market wages, paying the vastly inadequate minimum wage in the US is no longer a respectable answer if it ever was. Realizing this, more and more companies are seeking to understand what this concept means, how it applies in various contexts around the world and in the economies where they are headquartered. The public is aware more now than perhaps even before of what it means to have a living wage and what it means not to have one. And a workforce that is disproportionately women of color is louder and stronger than at any time in living memory in demanding the change. The way ahead is not without challenges, though, because living wages are so clearly the right choice for workers and their families, as well as in the interests of business and society. I'll take the privilege of this moment to speak to three dimensions of this path forward that are vitally important to keep present as we walk this road together. The first is a living wage movement. We must focus on worker voice and worker engagement. Living wage commitments are not an alternative to engaging robustly with workers in collective bargaining, but a support in favor of it. Empowering and engaging with workers is a crucial part of the path to implementing a true living wage. Second, we should never underestimate the power of small, deliberate changes made with integrity. We should not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Incremental progress is valid and necessary as long as it is transparent and meaningful in the ways required by the Living Wage for Us standard. A credible commitment and an initial step towards living wages is far more important than sweeping rhetoric without commitment. Third, Companies must live their values and advocate for them. It's crucial for companies to align their values and public commitments with both their operational practices and their lobbying efforts. It does little good to commit to raise wages while influencing the state to keep the minimum wage unsustainably low. Companies that fail to pay a living wage, some, while investing billions in buyback shares, are making clear where their values and their priorities lie, with shareholders and short-term profit rather than workers and long-term sustainability. Making investors who are disproportionately white men wealthier at the expense of a low-wage workforce that is disproportionately women of color is clearly an unacceptable and risky proposition, yet it remains far too common. Change is coming. Change is with us in this room today, represented by the speakers at this event, and those in the audience and those watching through the live stream. Companies today have the chance to lead that change. Those striving to implement or advocate for living wages are walking a path on the right side of history. It is part of a vital transition from a shareholder to a stakeholder model of capitalism that can allow our communities and our world to thrive in the decades ahead. At Oxfam, we look forward to continuing to support, advocate for, and stand alongside the living wage movement, both in the US and around the world.
Thanks so much, Irit, and we're happy to have you as a partner in doing that. The next person I want to introduce, before I go into that, I just want to talk a little bit more about that partnership piece, right? So we are, as Living Wage for us, we're a 501c3. We don't lobby for anything, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't want to help connect the employers we work with the resources that are important for them when they do want to support some of the policy changes or other directions to make sure, you know, hey, I'm paying a living wage. Maybe I want minimum wage to come up, makes me more competitive. I want to see how I can work towards that. And so one of the organizations that we're planning a new partnership with this year is One Fair Wage and the Raise High Road Employers. And that is a continuation of our strategy of focusing in on an industry until we can move 20% of that industry towards a living wage. As I mentioned before, we're working with 20% of the specialty coffee industry right now, moving them in that direction. The next logical place to go is restaurants and food service. And those are a low paying sector. We want to say that this can be done by small, medium, large, any type of business and any type of employer, and even in low wage sectors. And so as we go forward into next year, that is going to be a place where we're putting significant attention. And we do that through partnerships. With coffee, we were working alongside the Barista Guild, which is a group of baristas that have come together globally to advocate for their own rights, and the Specialty Coffee Association, an industry association, to help us get access to more and more coffee companies across the country. One Fair Wage is going to be one of the early partners for us to work on this restaurant push for the next year. So we will also be working with their high road employers to say, how do we get you from where you are in terms of not paying a sub-minimal wage as that first step to making sure we can get up to a living wage. And so to talk about that and some of that future way forward and how partnership's really important, we have today Rachel Miller-Munzer, who is the Chief Restaurant Officer at Big Dipper Hospitality Group. And they are one of those Raise High Road employers that's working along with One Fair Wage and will be working with us as we go forward. So welcome, Rachel.
Hi there. First, I want to say thank you for inviting us to be a part of this conversation. I'm sitting here for the past couple hours and really truly humbled by to be a part of speaking with all of you up here. And I know we're at the end of the day. My speech is a little rambling. I'll try to make it fast so we can get a drink and a snack. So I am, as Michelle said, Rachel Miller-Munzer. I'm one of 7 working business partners in the Big Dipper Hospitality Group. We own 3 restaurant concepts in the area: Mamala's Delicatessen, State Park, and Vincent's. We employ approximately 130 people, guarantee a minimum of $17 per hour, pay half the premiums on health insurance to employees working 25 hours or more, have a simple IRA plan with matching benefits, paid vacation for managers, a secure scheduling policy, and an FSA, HSA, and transit benefits. I'm here today to speak to you about why the Big Dipper Hospitality Group has joined Ray's High Road Restaurants and the One Fair Wage organization in the fight for one fair wage in Massachusetts and nationwide, and to address the challenges restaurant businesses face in the quest to pay a living wage. At Big Dipper, we are committed to providing a healthy workplace and living wages, and have also committed to work to close the gap between front and back of the house pay inequities. Massachusetts is one of 43 states that allows restaurants to pay a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. It's a direct legacy of slavery that has forced a mostly female population of tipped workers to suffer from incredibly high rates of economic instability and sexual harassment in order to get tips to feed their kids. With the pandemic, harassment went up and millions of workers started leaving the industry. In response, One Fair Wage has tracked over 5,000 restaurants who voluntarily raised their wages to anywhere from $15 to $50 plus tips. But we all need support. We need policy that will create a level playing field for all restaurants by raising wages across the board and signal to millions of workers that it's worth coming back to work in restaurants. And we're winning. We just won One Fair Wage policy in Michigan in July. And last Tuesday, DC voters voted to raise tipped restaurant workers' wages from $5 to $16.75. There are about a dozen states poised to follow, including right here in Massachusetts, where legislation is pending to end the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers and support restaurants like ours that are committed to getting to livable wages. Currently in Massachusetts, we are entitled to pay a sub-minimum wage of $6.15 per hour to tipped employees, and let their tipped wages bring them to full minimum wage of $14.25. In early 2021, we decided to take the plunge into the world of full minimum wage and more aggressive work towards a living wage for all employees. We no longer pay a sub-minimum wage to any of our employees. It has been a challenge and certainly a stress on the business in the short term, but we are committed to it for the long term. We pay all employees a full minimum wage and guarantee at least $17 an hour, which gets paid through tips or a fair wage surcharge that we add on to all checks. Most employees earn upwards of $18 per hour, and many are earning $21 or more. Because in Massachusetts, it is illegal to share tips between the front and back of the house, we have made strides in the front and back of house equity piece, but we will not truly be able to close the gap without legislation allowing for tip sharing. In the restaurant business, we need legislation around living wages to be able to make a true leap of progress. The good news is that there is currently a wave of momentum around this issue. One of the reasons we need to eliminate the sub-minimum wage and allow for sharing of tips throughout the restaurant. The tip sharing issue is specifically a Massachusetts, New York, and Maine issue, is that businesses like ours have committed to living wages are at a competitive disadvantage. We must charge more to pay more. But when our neighbors are paying more than $8 an hour less than us, they can sell the same food for a fraction of the cost. The former head of Ray's, Mikey Nab, taught me an expression which always stuck with me. There is no such thing as a free breadstick. Someone is paying for that bread. And with a sub-minimum wage, it is not the business owner. You wouldn't go into a store to buy a shirt and expect to have service charges or a tip to make up the pay of the clerk. The employee is paid, and the item costs what it costs. We must bring the restaurant business into the 21st century. According to One Fair Wage, in 7 states where there has been legislation eliminating the sub-minimum wage, sales have gone up, tips have gone up, and full-service restaurants have grown at a higher rate than those that are still paying the sub-minimum wage. The living wage issue is challenged by the leap for employers from sub-minimum to full minimum to living wage. So leveling the playfield has to be the first step in getting a mass commitment to reach the living wage goals. Thanks to the hard work of One Fair Wage, many motivated workers, and other lobbying groups, House 1971 and Senate 1213, an act requiring one fair wage, got moved out of the Massachusetts Legislative Committee on labor and workforce, and will be part of the State House and Senate's agendas in 2023. As a handful of restaurants paying better and putting systems in place, we reach a handful of employees that can experience better conditions. But the restaurant industry on a whole still suffers from the overworked and underpaid image and reality. We need policy at the state and federal levels, which would send a clear message to the entire potential workforce that restaurant jobs are good jobs, that the restaurant industry pays at least the full minimum wage with shareable tips on top, which must be shareable between all employees. Then restaurants like ours will no longer be competing with the race to the bottom mentality set by the big corporate chains who leverage low wages to keep menu prices down. This frees us to invest in our team in other ways. The restaurant industry was ripped open during the pandemic. And with that, there's a huge potential for positive change. We are in a business that employs nearly 1 in 10 American workers. Yes, the same as Walmart. With supportive legislation, we can force real change and make great strides towards living wages for all restaurant workers. Thank you again for including me, and we're looking forward to a bright future.
So that brings us to a close. I'm sorry we got started a little bit late with everyone and everyone online. We really appreciate you being part of this virtually. We're going to move forward into those of us that are here, some time to network, but I want to give a few notes of gratitude first. To Amalgamated Bank for hosting us here and participating in the panel. It's sincerely appreciated. That kind of support really means a lot to us. For everyone who came out with a rainy day and decided to come in person, apparently hybrid is like everyone wants to say, I appreciate that. You know, it's nice to have you there. For those of you that are interested and dedicated to this issue, that means a lot to us. For the volunteers that came and helped us with check-in, really appreciate the time that you gave to help in this effort, and to all of our speakers for being able to come up here and stand and talk about these important issues. And Rick, for honestly sharing your book release with us is such an exciting moment. But it just goes to show the kind of support behind really moving this issue forward. This is one of those things that I'll be completely honest, everyone tends to agree on when you have a conversation, right? No matter what side of a political divide, where you come from, if you ask somebody, hey, do you think somebody working really hard full time, you know, should not be able to feed their kids at the end of the day? I don't think anyone's ever said yes to that. And what they've said instead is there are challenges. So we want to help overcome those challenges. Tell us what those are. And we'll sort of finish out by saying, contact us. If you're an employer and you want to know, first thing is just know where you fall against a living wage. Just get assessed. Just find it out, right? If you're another organization that thinks that you're working on wage issues, you could benefit from the data that we're collecting, we'll share. We're not trying to own everything in this space. Let us know and let us share with you, right? If you're an investor or you're a foundation and you're saying, well, we don't really know how to have those that aren't getting funds yet be assessed against a living wage. Our project for this upcoming year is we're redesigning a new system so that investors, foundations, and those interested in their US supply chain can more freely make the analysis available to all those that want to look at it. And so if your issue is, well, we can't really understand who's doing what, we can solve those issues for you. And that's what we'd like to do. That's our role and our stake in this. And if you just want to be connected with a movement, you know, like Rachel spoke about with One Fair Wage or with Oxfam or with somebody else who's really taking this issue forward, call us and tell us. You know, we're keeping a bank of those people to connect you to. So we just really love to engage. The last one I just wanted to thank, because I can't forget him at all, is Biko Nagara, who's our Chief Program Officer and has been behind the scenes, but doing a fantastic job today. And thank you to everybody, you know, all the audiovisual and the catering as well. And there is, for those of you online, this is the discount we are going to email out to everyone for Rick Wartzman's book. If you're interested, and those of you here, I think Rick has some sleeves that he can sign for you if you're interested in getting that forward. But thank you again, and everyone have a fantastic night, and look forward to working with many of you.